Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you and really talk about a precision population health initiative, which I've named Beyond the Human Genome. And it really has two objectives. In the long term, we want to invent the science of wellness and prevention through a second Human Genome Project that does include 1 million people, and I'll describe that in just a moment. And of course, that'll take a year or two to get federal funding. So in the short term, what we'll be doing is pioneering a data-rich observational series of studies for precision medicine on chronic diseases, starting first with diabetes. And I'll describe that effort in some detail. But let me give you a bit of background on going beyond the first Human Genome Project. As you know, the Human Genome Project generated a single sequence over 13 years. And what this Beyond the Human Genome Project proposes to do is to generate 1 million whole genome sequences and their corresponding longitudinal phenome analyses over a period of 10 years. And the idea is not just to acquire the data for research, but to actually be able to convert it into actionable possibilities that allow one to improve health. And I stress, we're talking about health for body and for brain. We're seeking a new federal program for support. And we're also, in the short term, seeking industrial and governmental support to initiate the data-rich short-term projects I'll talk about in just a moment. I started last year Phenome Health, a nonprofit. It has a powerful team focused primarily on computational of multi-omic data and healthcare data. And we've accrued, as you will see, partners that will help us execute this challenging project. And what moves this project beyond the original Human Genome Project are the longitudinal phenome assays, for they're really the secret to decoding health for the individual. The genome, as we all know, is a source code for human development and aging and similar kinds of processes. And it, of course, is unchanging across your life, apart from cancer. Whereas the phenome, in contrast, is the unique integration of one's genome, their environment, and their behavior. And these integrations set at each instant of your life who and what you are. Your life represents an infinity of different phenomes, and the phenome is assayed, we assay it anyway, by looking at blood analytes, the gut microbiome, and digital measurements of body and brain, which I'll describe in some detail a little bit later. So building on the first Human Genome Project, one person, one genome in 13 years, what we plan to do is to, across a 10-year period, analyze 1 million genomes and their phenomes to see how over that period of time, the phenome changes in correlation with this integration of genome behavior and environment and so forth. The science of wellness and prevention really is critical for both body and brain, and it actually has 3 separate stages. Most of us begin in wellness. At a later time, we all undergo one or more transitions into a disease that progresses. And above the trajectory of the individual is given the increasing complexity of disease-perturbed networks that occur during disease progression, up to the point that you can actually do clinical diagnosis of the disease finally. And of course, for the initial disease transitions, most of us reverse back and return to a wellness state. And what I do want to emphasize is this means that health really has three distinct stages. One is the wellness stage. A second is the transition stage from wellness to disease. And a third is the initiation and progression of the disease. And of course, the reversal back to wellness. What I want to emphasize, and what I'll show you at least partially in the course of this lecture, is that with data-driven wellness now, we have many opportunities to optimize your wellness far beyond what you normally have exhibited. In my estimate is the ordinary person represents, when healthy, perhaps 30% of their wellness, and there is enormous opportunity for optimization beyond what we typically have. A second point I'll make is that with this data-driven approach to health, we have the ability to detect at the earliest stage transitions that occur up to years before the disease can be clinically diagnosed. And the hope for prevention, of course, is that we can detect for each individual each of these transitions and reverse them before they ever manifest as disease. And of course, with regard to disease, we do take a precision medicine approach to be able to do three things that are really important: to divide chronic diseases into their distinct subtypes. And these subtypes will primarily come about as a consequence of both your genome and your environmental exposures and your behavior. And we want not only to be able to stratify diseases like diabetes into their different subtypes, but for each subtype to identify the transitions that occur during the natural history of the disease, so we can identify points in that transition where we can attack diseases at very early stages. And I'll say more about this later. If we succeed with this, I'd argue it's the largest paradigm shift in the history of medicine. That is moving healthcare from a focus primarily on disease to a focus oriented around wellness and prevention. We've looked at two distinct populations that give us evidence that the data-driven approach to wellness and health is going to be very effective. We started in 2015 a company called Airvale that brought scientific wellness to individuals and accrued a population of 5,000. And here we carried out across that 4-year period a genome analysis for each, plus these longitudinal phenome analyses. And as I'll show you, this led to the science-driven approach to wellness and prevention. In a second series of studies, our collaborator, Michael Merzenich, at the company Posit, developed the ability to make 40 digital assessments for 25 different cognitive features of humans and assess their healthiness and even make predictions about the onset of classic brain diseases. And he developed as well the assessment to restore lost cognitive function, with the major point being that your brain is flexible, and even in your 80s, you can regain lost cognitive functions. And he's looked at more than 10,000 patients over the last 15 years in 250 clinical trials. So with this data as a background, I'll say from the Airvale population, a number of major conclusions were drawn from these individual 5,000 data clouds. And I'll just say over the last 7 or 8 years, we've had more than 15 papers in terrific journals that document translating data into actionable possibilities dealing with wellness and prevention of disease. And of course, first among these was the ability to take these 6 different data types and do statistical correlations of bits in one type with data bits in other types. And these correlations often led to really interesting correlative insights, which we could go into the literature to confirm as actionable possibilities, which if acted upon by the individual, the relevant individual, could improve wellness and or let them avoid disease. I myself, for example, had a beautiful correlation between very low serum vitamin D levels and 2 defective genes for the uptake of vitamin D. And through using very large doses of vitamin D, was able to bring my vitamin D levels back to normal and to maintain them with high levels at a normal state. And there are a lot of reasons for wanting to have your vitamin D at a normal level. From Airvale, more than 200 such actionable possibilities were generated. Because we had individuals ranging from 21 to 93, we were able to bin them into 10-year categories and analyze, for example, the expression levels of analytes in the blood, proteins, clinical chemistries, metabolites, and demonstrate that there were beautiful linear increases for each of these metabolites in the envelopes of expression as you age. That is, the envelopes became wider and wider. And we developed an algorithm from this observation that allowed us to determine one's biological age, the age your body, as opposed to your birthday, says you are. The lower the biological age, the better off you are. We demonstrated in Airvale for every year you were in the program, you lost a year to a year and a half of biological age, a remarkable confirmation of the optimization of wellness and the fact that we can assess wellness regularly in individuals. The analytes we used to determine this algorithmic calculation of biological age actually gave us insights into how to optimize healthy aging. And of course, the importance of healthy aging is, since it is the major predisposing factor for all chronic diseases, if we can delay chronic diseases, we enormously increase the wellness of individuals, as has been beautifully demonstrated by the COVID example over the last 3 years or so. We also were able to take polygenic scores from 54 different diseases and convert them into genetic risk scores and bin the Airvale population of 5,000 into 5 bins from very low to very high and 3 in between. And we were able beautifully, for example, the propensity for high LDL cholesterol approximate for cardiovascular disease, to show we should treat individuals with very high risk quite differently from those with low risk for LDL cholesterol. In the former case, only statins brought down the levels of cholesterol. In the latter case, we were able to use diet, exercise, and similar approaches very beautifully. We think the same will be true of most of the other chronic diseases. One striking observation was, over the time we looked at these individuals, we saw 167 wellness to disease transitions for the diagnosis of all most major chronic diseases, including 35 that led to cancer. We interrogated the serums drawn prior to clinical diagnosis for 10 cancer cases, and in each case, we're able to demonstrate proteins that were very off scale compared to the normal distributions that marked the onset of these diseases up to 3 or 4 years prior to their clinical diagnosis. And the idea here, again, is to use these transitions that will in the future be able to predict accurately the disease that was transitioned to and reverse them before they exhibit themselves as manifest clinical disease. And a final point I'll make is that we recently have been able to develop a beautiful metric for metabolic BMI that is far better than the physical metric in terms of both its responsiveness and its ability, for example, to separate athletes with enormous muscle mass from those that have severe obesity. And these two metrics, the metabolic BMI and the biological age metric, will be things that we'll routinely measure in our patients on a biannual basis in the future to give us, again, insights into these particular areas. And of course, this leads to the interesting idea that there are two complementary kinds of wellness. Traditional wellness, which many practice, that focuses on exercise, diet, sleep, stress management, and the like. And as I say, there are many companies out there doing it. And a data-driven wellness whose dimensions actually complement traditional wellness beautifully. And the actionable possibilities from data-driven wellness can come, one, from the genome, or two, from the phenome, or three, from the integration together of these different data types. And the really important point is the data-driven wellness allow us to personalize and enhance the traditional features for individuals in beautiful ways that haven't been possible prior to this new data-driven approach. I do want to emphasize that brain health is a critical part of this component program, and that these 40 digital health measurements have been allowed us to assess 25 different cognitive features: reaction time, depth of field, memory, and the like. And what Michael Merzenich has done is, which is really beautiful, is to take about 1,000 80-year-olds and show that the majority of them can restore their cognitive functions to their maximum, which occurs in your mid-30s, and with most people, there's a steady decline thereafter. And in doing so, it demonstrates the flexibility of the brain and a very optimistic view we can retain the majority of our cognitive functions very late into life. It's essential for having a wellness span that equals your lifespan, hopefully into the 90s or beyond. The clinical trials on this approach have also demonstrated the ability to detect certain brain conditions: depression, drug addiction, proclivity, schizophrenia, PTSD, TBI, and actually can do something that begins to improve these different features. And again, there are a couple of papers here that give you a description of this whole approach to brain health. But I think the really important point is, for the science of wellness, we can optimize through these scientific wellness features body health. We can optimize brain health, as I've just described, and we're beginning to learn how to optimize the gut microbiome health via metagenomics, and we've had several recent papers on this effort and its impact on aging, its impact on the use of normal drugs individuals use, and the like. And of course, putting together these axes, body, brain, and gut, is really a key part of health. The science of wellness really has two major features. If we can slow down aging, we will delay the onset of chronic diseases, and that is a very powerful form of prevention, obviously. And number two, we'll be able to identify and in time reverse these disease transitions for each of the individual types of chronic disease. And remember, of our $4 trillion in healthcare spend, 86% go to healthcare to chronic diseases, and the ability to turn around and reverse these is going to lead to enormous cost savings in the healthcare system. Using genetic risk to be able to assess appropriate treatments, using digital brain diagnosis to optimize those features. And there are other assets of brain wellness that I won't have time to really talk about at this point in time. But with this new million-person project, we'll have thousands of new actionable possibilities. And this will necessitate bringing them to patients and their caregivers with AI. Where are we now and beyond the Human Genome Project? We're going to assess many additional features beyond those we did in Airville. We'll extend the blood analytes. We'll bring in brain cognitive functions. We'll use brain microbiome metagenomics to analyze that. And we're going to use self-tracking with the Fitbit and the Oura Ring and some other brain features that I won't talk about. We're going to typically have the electronic health record for every patient we look at, and we'll be using social determinants of health and patient-reported outcomes, in addition to carrying out whole human genome sequencing. And of course, what is required by the million-person project beyond the Human Genome Project are these 6 different features. One, to acquire the patients. And Guardian Research Network is our major partner there because they have access to 30 million patients in 120 different hospital systems. And they've done 3 important things. One, they've consented the patients for programs like this. 2, they've learned to extract the electronic health records beautifully, both structured and unstructured data from typical healthcare databases. And 3, they lie in 13 states across large African American and Latino populations. So we'll be able to deal with equity, diversity, and inclusion in effective ways. Second thing is, once we obtain the million patients, we have to sample them, as I've indicated, blood and urine and digital measurements, and place these in a biobank and send them out then for analysis, multi-omic, digital, clinical, and the self-reported. We have to be able to take these data and then put them in the cloud for analysis. And we've created for analysis a very powerful Phenome Health data core that essentially allows us to automate all of the prior features that I've talked about here in this database. The patients from Guardian Research Network, together with our biobank and the data generators that we'll be employing, and to then generate value from these data. Body and brain health, healthy aging, new knowledge, new therapeutics that leads to social value, and obviously the equity and inclusion. And Posit and Brain HQ are our partners on the brain health end of things. And we've just finished a beautiful agreement with Scientific American that is promoting now this whole idea with a special issue that's going to be focused on human precision population health. And that issue is actually going to be coming out sometime in the coming November and so forth. A second thing we'll be doing beyond the million-person project is to take 3 distinctive observational approaches to the 4 major chronic diseases, starting with diabetes. We'll begin with a retrospective analysis of these 30 million health records. And there, what we want to do are to obtain clinical correlates for 1, major subtypes of diabetes, and 2, within the subtypes, the transition states. And we'll use these markers to select patients poised at each of the transition points. For example, in diabetes, we're collaborating with Ralph Snyderman at Duke, and his team has a hypothesis that the most common type of diabetes has 4 major transition points, and we hope to be able to record them and to poise patients at each of those 4 transition points, because then we'll enroll 250 patients for each of those 4 transition points in observational trials where we'll do data-rich analyses, including genome phenome analyses and very deep single-cell immune phenotyping, which we've optimized on very effective COVID clinical trials. And these have been reported in 3 major papers over the last couple of years, 2 in Cell and 1 in Nature Biotechnology. And what this will enable us to do is assess in a 3 to 4 year period transition state by looking at the various transitions, and to get biomarkers and to make risk trajectory calculations and predict treatment responses. And finally, from the observational perspective studies, we'll move into interventional ones where we can test the hypotheses with regard to biomarkers and data that have been actually generated at this point in time. So as you can see, we have a whole series of major partners that we've talked about that are helping us with this endeavor. We've explored federal partnerships with NIH and all of us, DOE, and its technology and computational programs, and the VA and their million-person project. We've been actively lobbying for the last year and a half Congress, both the House and Senate, and both sides of the aisle. And we hope to be able to put this program in the new ARPA-H possibility to create an infrastructure to spread wellness and prevention across the entire US. We're creating a Phenome Ventures for-profit company that is actually going to spin off innovation and intellectual creativity and ideas as new startup companies, and 2 of those are already in the process of formation. Phenome for me, a commercialization of the vision of the science of wellness and prevention, and a deep platform that carry out all of the different aspects of this data-driven approach to health. And it's backed by a really outstanding advisory board of 12 leaders in science, including Jeff Wilkie, who was #2 at Amazon until recently, Roger Perlmutter, #2 at Merck until recently, Victor Zhao, who's president of the National Academy of Medicine, Ralph Snyderman, a good friend for many years, and the father of clinical personalized medicine, and George Church has played a major role in helping us think through a lot of these efforts and so forth. The board has been absolutely outstanding. What I will stress is not only are we going to use the Phenome Health computational platform and its multi-omic analysis and its integrative abilities, but we're thinking to actually assess the ability to do this multidimensional integration by including it with knowledge graphs, and there are 2 major types. Google has one with 50 million edges, and there's one from UCSF that's even more detailed in its delineation of biological knowledge. Twin models for wellness and disease are going to be very powerful in the future, and these will all be tied together to attack hyperscale AI. And in fact, I'll say a little bit about this. Digital twin is nothing more than integrating together top-down physiologic and mechanistic knowledge with bottom-up biochemical knowledge. And as we increase both of these types of information, we specify in more detail the unique features of the digital twin for a given disease like diabetes. We'll never be able to get to a phase where we have complete knowledge or so forth. And that's why the use of the digital twin will be tied together with other types of knowledge, and both of those integrated into hyperscale AI. So the idea is we can take all of this enormous amount of data from the patient and put it together with big knowledge that's acquired through these knowledge graphs and the digital twin context for specific diseases or wellness. We'll have digital twins for wellness as well, where we can integrate these things together and present them to the possibility of very deep learning through the hyperscale AIs that Google through DeepMind and Microsoft through AI have generated, and these hyperscale systems are essentially enormously powerful computational engines, tens of thousands of times more powerful than any individual things out there. And what is the really exciting idea is big data today, when we do the statistical correlations, ends up creating hypotheses. But with this new type of very deep learning, there is the possibility one can move directly to causal inferences directly from data. And of course, this is an arguable but very exciting point for the future. There are many large-scale population efforts. The UK British Biobank has been one of the most effective. A new program over there, UK's Our Future Health, where 5 million patients will have electronic health records and genomes finished. The All of Us program here in the US, focusing on digital measurements, various types of genome measurements and electronic health records. And of course, Intermountain in Mexico and Estonia, and there are others. And there are two programs, Singapore and China, that have not only genome, but phenome as well. And of course, that is the shared feature with Beyond the Human Genome Project. I've described it here. And we're actually negotiating with a number of these groups to position ourselves as an integrative example to build an international data cloud for storage and accessibility of phenomic data on a very large scale access. So what is unique about Beyond the Human Genome Project? It is all about moving healthcare from a disease orientation to a wellness orientation. It is all about deep phenomic analyses, genome, phenome, digital health, electronic health records, determinants of health, patient-reported outcomes, and using this database, which is going to be open to all, and the biobanks to test data-driven hypotheses and so forth effectively. It generates actionable possibilities that give us new insights for optimizing wellness and preventing disease, as I've described later, that will, because of their diversity, have to be delivered by AI. We're creating the modular infrastructure for doing this entire entity that I've talked about Beyond the Human Genome, and be able to pass it on to other groups that want to carry out these efforts as well. We're setting up these special integrative computational tools, knowledge graph, digital twins, hyperscale AI, and the like, to explore the many dimensions of individual patient data. Phenome Ventures is going to be a for-profit to spin off companies based on the knowledge and insights that come from analyzing this big data ecosystem. And I'll close by saying, I think Beyond the Human Genome offers uniquely powerful solutions to what I call the 5 major challenges of contemporary healthcare. The quality of our healthcare, and in the US, it's much lower than the top 20 developed economies out there, in spite of the fact we spend 4 to 5 times as much as the next individual. And that speaks in part to the complications of this heterogeneous system of independence as contrasted with government single-payer systems. Number two, we have a rapidly aging population. We have really good ways to approach that. How are we going to deal with the explosion of chronic diseases? This data-intense approach, I would argue, in a 5-year period will bring enormous new insights and knowledge to each of the major diseases: cardiovascular, neurodegenerative, cancer, and diabetes. Cost escalations are impossible in a 20-year period. The cost savings that come from focusing on wellness and prevention rather than disease are obvious, and we will include diversity, equity, and so forth. So thank you very much for listening. I've enjoyed talking, and I hope I've given you some ideas that will stimulate your thinking about a very new type of healthcare that's coming in the future: wellness and the prevention of disease.